Okay, so after verifying all the passages that I'm concerned about are passing air through, looks like everything's good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my jets back in. So that means this emulsion tube, jet needle, whatever you want to call them. Screw those back in. Then we'll put the main jets in after that. But first we have to tighten these down as well. Don't go too tight on these because they are brass and can deform easily. Now we're going to go ahead . Alright, so jets are in. Gonna wait on putting in the little idle screws up there until I get the gaskets from the kit. And not sure about those float bowls either. They may be coming, or sorry, floats rather. They may be coming with new needle valves as well. So I'm gonna wait until I get my kit for that. Couldn't remember whether they came with needle valves in the kit. The other thing the kit does come with are some O-rings for all these bypass tubes, or bypass tubes and the vent tubes. They aren't leaking, and separating these carburetors is a lot of work, so I'm going to leave it. If later on I have to go back and do it, there'll be spares. But for now, there aren't any fuel leaks that I've seen, so I don't really think it's worth the trouble to separate that and then have to clean up everything in there and get all the junk out when they're sealing properly as of right now. So I'm just going to put the bowls back on temporarily to keep dirt out. And then we're just going to wait on our gaskets to come in for the final assembly. Okay, so we're back with the carb cleaning and re-gasketing project. Went to the local Honda dealer and bought some very expensive gaskets. There's a bunch of stuff that comes with this, not all of which I'm going to be using right now. Doesn't mean to say in the future I might be using some of these other O-rings, but I'm going to be using the little O-ring and the float bowl gasket. The rest of them are going to be in reserve because I would have to take the whole thing apart to re-gasket the rest of it. Doesn't seem to be leaking, so I'm not gonna mess with it. Hopefully it stays not leaking for a while, but these will have them in stock if needed. So I have to go through the float bowls, put these gaskets on, and then I also have to reinstall the floats as well as a little needle valve thingamajigs in these holes as well. So I'll be going through and doing that. And then I'm going to put the caps back on with the pistons. Got these nicely painted. They were not chrome, so we just put some, what do you call it, metallic silver, I guess, on those. So I'm going to put those back on as well. and just work on getting everything put back together here. These gaskets are pretty straightforward. They just pop right in. And you just have to make sure that they're seated properly. Needles are the same way. And I got some new hardware as well, which is all stainless. So I got using these hex head screws for the top. I also have some washers as well. The other ones are really badly corroded. Also have some of these little Allen screws, which are kind of hard to see, but those are going to go right in here and replace the somewhat corroded and semi-stripped out standard Phillips heads that I was using as well. So I'll work on putting those back together. From my other video of taking everything apart, you should see how everything goes back together, and I'll keep you updated. Alright, pardon the rain noise, it's a bit rainy. So for the top caps, use these 4mm bolts. They have a 7mm hex head. Everything on here is 4mm, the float bolts and the top caps, I guess you'd say, for the slides. These things are a little tricky when you put them back in. What I like to do is just make sure that tab up here is lined up there, and then try to make sure that everything is just seated in a just centered, because when the cap comes down, it'll push down everything evenly. Hopefully, we'll cross our fingers on that. Don't forget your spring, put that in as well, and then just be careful and tighten down everything very evenly when you do end up finally putting those bolts in. I just hand tightened everything with a screwdriver handle sort of thing with my 7mm socket right on the end, so I don't wreck anything, and hand tight should be just fine as long as it makes a seal. So I got my top hats installed. Next thing I want to do is go in and change these itty bitty little gasket O-ring things that go on the pilot jets. Pilot air screws, whatever the heck you want to call them. Idle screws, these little things. There's a little tiny washer you have to make sure you don't lose. That goes on, and then the O-rings go on. So I'm going to put those new O-rings on all 4 of these screws. Okay, so your finished product should look like this. Camera's a little trouble focusing because it's so close. But then those just go in. Luckily this O-ring kind of holds the rest of the assembly in. So you can just stick it down in there. And then lightly tighten it down until it seats. Do not over tighten these, because that rubber is in there and you'll wreck it. So I just tighten it down until it seats. Right about there. Kind of reference where that is, and then we're going to go out 2.5 turns. That's the recommended setting for these screws. So that's a half turn, 1, 1.5, 2, and then 2.5, and that's where I'll leave that. I'm going to repeat it for the rest of the jets. Alright, so the carburetors have been reassembled. Got those pilot jets in. The last thing I have to do is make sure that these the choke rail here is tightened down, because I was messing with that, trying to get it out. Decided to abandon that. And the last thing I want to do is look at this fuel line. I have to find an auto parts store, because this is pretty hard, and I don't really trust it to being run that much longer. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to pull that off. There may be an O-ring in there which I can use. Otherwise, all the other O-rings are in these T sections here, which I have not separated the carburetors. Should be okay. They weren't leaking before. Again, for a total rebuild, to break everything apart, you would need a lot more gaskets, and it would take a lot more time. Trying to avoid having to do that. But someday, if I do need those O-rings, I will have them. So, new fuel line, then we're going to put them back on the bike, see if it'll idle, see if it holds fuel, etc., and go from there. Further updates coming. Okay, so I just test fitted the carburetors. The new fuel line, plugged in the tank, hit the vacuum pump for a little bit. Doesn't seem to be any leaks, so that's good. Now I gotta figure out how to get all these connections back on. Throttle cable and choke cables as well. Those are gonna be a bit of a doozy. So that's where they have to go in there, and as you can see, there's like no room. So that's gonna be fun. Just kidding. And then all the electronics, regulator, rectifier, wiring harnesses, and such. Hopefully I can get this test fired here in the next little while. Gotta take off the tank and go from there. Okay, so the tank has been temporarily put back on. We have idle. A little bit lumpy, but that's how it's always been. Goes up nice and smooth. Better than it's ever done before. We continue to warm it up a little bit, although I don't have the air cleaner piping attached. Trying to get the right choke setting too, because that's going to be different. Because the carbs have been rejetted, not rejetted, but the idle screws have been tweaked. Try to figure out that. Run for a little while longer here. Come on. And hopefully everything is good to go. A lot of stuff I gotta put back on, but looks like we've won the battle with the carburetors at this point. So despite as much finagling and messing around with these intake boots, all of which was unsuccessful. Well, be slightly successful, but they still don't line up on the outside of the carburetor. There's an air gap. Potentially junk could get in. This is probably not a long-term solution, but I'm using some of my goop rubber cement to seal those gaps. The rest of them look okay. It's just those outside two. So I don't know what to do about this situation. There's no replacement OEM parts available. And any used ones that I might buy are probably shrunk just like those. It's just one of those annoying problems you have to deal with older equipment. So I'm going to get the tank back on the fender and the rest of the bodywork. And hopefully I can take this thing for a ride today for the first time in a while. Further updates coming.